You all to an afternoon of poetry and discussion today. My epitaph is not just an anthology of poems, it is a labor of love. And an audience like this is the best kind of encouragement for any poet. So thank you all for coming out on a Sunday afternoon for this poetry event. On behalf of the poet, Mr. Jagdeep Singh, I would like to extend my gratitude to Mr. Apurv Kumar and the team of Class Summit for very kindly hosting this event. And I'd also like to extend thanks to Mr. Sandeep Butoria and the Prabha Khaitan Foundation for supporting the event. I now invite the MD of the Cluster of Hotels and the President of Federation of Hospitality and Tourism of Rajasthan, Mr. Apurv Kumar, the poet, Mr. Jagdeep Singh, Mr. Suhaas Ahuja, Beena Kak Ma'am, Mr. Rajiv Arora on stage to release. Recognized from the world of television and film. Hailing from a family of theatre practitioners, Suhas is a film graduate from the Middlebury College and began his career as a VJ in his hometown of Chennai. In 2005, he moved to Mumbai and began work as an assistant director while continuing to pursue his childhood love for theatre with the prestigious The Company Theatre. Mr. Ahuja has been a part of many well-known theatre productions like Sunil Chernbach's Club Desire, QTP Productions' A Peasant of El Salvador, Mike Bartlett's Bull, directed by Jim Sull, and the NCPA production of The Mirror Crack, to name a few. In terms of his work in film, TV and web series, Mr. Ahuja has essayed the role of Roger in Nikhil Advani's Katti Batti, played the crucial role of Sanjay Kejriwal in the 2012 blockbuster Talash, and starred as the male lead in talented young filmmaker Tanmay Singh's award-winning short film Madeline Lights, which showed at numerous festivals and garnered 4 Best Actor awards for Suhas. On a side note, Tanmay, the young filmmaker, is also among us here today, and he happens to be Mr. Jagdeep Singh's son. Going back to Suhas, Suhas has also been a part of POW Bandi Youth Play, the Indian television adaptation of the popular American TV show Homeland. Since 2019, he has acted in various OTT web series and also continues to work as a freelance music producer, as well as a singer-songwriter and the frontman of the Suhaas Ahuja band, which is all set to release their debut album in the summer of 2022. Let's extend a warm welcome to Mr. Suhaas Ahuja with a round of applause, which you've already invited us to already. The other gentleman on stage is one that we all know as the PR man of the Pink City. Mr. Jagdeep Singh, popularly known as Jags by one and all, began his career in PR over 35 years ago with RICO. Today, he heads Rajasthan's biggest and best-known public relations agency, Spark PR and Communications. It would be hard to find an event, organization, or individual of note in Rajasthan that Spark and Jags have not worked with. But let me mention a few. One of them being the world-renowned Jaipur Literature Festival, which recently showcased his poetic works in Jaipur and London, the prestigious Jaipur Jewellery Show, the Federation of Hospitality and Tourism of Rajasthan, the Indian Heritage Hotels Association, the Royal Family of Jaipur, Rajasthan Tourism, Jawar Kala Kendra, the Rambagh Palace Hotel, and the Clarks Group of Hotel are some of the names that we can mention. Jags is a man of many talents. Educationalist, he began his career as a teacher of the English language at Xavier School. As a writer, his insightful articles have been published in many well-known magazines and journals over the years, including the Reader's Digest. A PR man, as we all know well, and now as a poet, though he has been writing poetry for most of his adult life, and many of the evocative pieces in my epitaph date back to his youth. Sorry, make that younger days. Without further ado, let us begin with a conversation about my epitaph, an anthology of poems. Over to you, gentlemen.
Is my voice audible at the end? Yeah. Thank you, Kalanika, for the nice introductions you've given us first and welcoming the guests. On my behalf also, I would like to welcome all of you. Just one day after the Diwali celebrations, when all of you were so busy and many of you have house guests, you've chosen to accept my invitation to come here on a Sunday morning for a poetry discussion. I am indeed overwhelmed. I am indeed overwhelmed by your presence here. I would like to particularly thank Beena Kak ma'am, Rajiv Arora ji, and some of the very senior officers. Omendra Bhardwaj ji has been my batchmate in Mayo, Ajit Singh ji, Ben Saab, so many of you are here. I'm really grateful to all of you. I've had the opportunity of working closely with Beena Kak ji. She was my honorable minister, and I can tell you it was indeed a great learning experience. I would also like to profusely thank Mr. Apoor Kumar, Timmy Kumar, the Clark's group of family. The moment Apoorji got to know of my book, he kept telling me, Jags, you have to host it at Clark's and nowhere else. And he's done such a fine job of hosting this event. Please give him a big round of applause. Mr. Sandeep Baturia hasn't come to Jaipur for almost 2 years now, but he is known to have changed the art, culture and literary scene of the Pink City. He has also lent support to this event, and let me tell you that he is also organizing a book event of this poetry book in Calcutta, Delhi as well as Raipur. My gratitude to him. Suhaas has been, I've known him because he was the main protagonist in my son's short film, which won many international awards, and he was very busy shooting in Bhopal and other places, but I told him, Suhaas, you have to come for a day. The reason why I did it, because I had sent him my poetry anthology a few months ago, and the kind of questions he was asking me, the kind of observations he made about the poetry, I was very keen that he should come at least for a day. He's come by the morning flight, will be going back by the evening flight. Thank you very much, Suhaas. I would also like to thank Writers' Workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you are aware that for an Indian poet writing in English, the ultimate publishing house is Writers' Workshop. They have a dreaded reputation of rejecting as many as 95% of the manuscripts submitted to them. They call them typescripts now. So it was with great trepidation that I had sent my typescript to them, and they are not accessible. They don't take calls, you can't go and meet them in Calcutta. You only have to deal through if they accept your manuscript, they might take a call and further discuss it, and they reply yes or no in 30 days. Luckily for me, they accepted all my poems without editing any of the poems, and within 30 days I got the answer. To be published by Writers' Workshop, ladies and gentlemen, is a great honor. And in Calcutta, Mr. Baturia is trying to have Professor Ananda Lal, son of Professor P. Lal, who run Writers' Workshop, poets themselves, to be in conversation with me. I would also like to thank Tulika Haldar, she's a former Times of India journalist in Jaipur, now based in Mumbai, who started, I had written my poems and forgotten about it. In 2017, she started an online poetry portal called A Voice from Far Away, and she kept writing me that you shared some of your poems on the Facebook earlier, so why don't you share them on my portal? With her insistence, I started sending her some of my poems, and then I wrote some more new poems which got huge traction on her portal, and that motivated. And then we have this journalist here who is not present today, Tabina, she's away to Kashmir. Tabina kept telling me, Jack, send them, compile your poems, compile your poems. Himanshu Vyas, another photographer and a poet, he's also not here, formerly of Hindustan Times, kept telling me. And so I'm thankful to all of them for motivating me to finally compile my poetry and send them to the Writers' Workshop. I would also like to thank my team, Kalinika, Tusharika, and the Spark team for helping me organize this event and sending the typescripts, proofreading my poems when they came from there. Thanks to media for continual coverage. The book came out in January. There have been numerous reviews, some of which have been put on the thing. A lot of coverage. Whenever my video was broadcasted by JLF in London, JLF or Jaipur, the media has been amazing support. Even today, they've carried news items about this event that we have. And lastly, I would like to thank the JLF and Sanjoy Roy for giving my poetry video an opportunity to be telecast both in London and in Jaipur. And I got huge traction because of that. Thank you very much, everyone. I hand over to Suhas now.
Is this on? Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello? Oh yeah. Oh, that works great. Jax, do you remember today when I got off the flight, I told you that I had a story from the flight to share with you?
Yeah,
Okay.
you did.
So now I'm going to share that with everybody before I share with you personally. So I'm on the flight and very coincidentally, somebody I know, this very fine actress called Harleen Sethi, she's on the plane as well. We recognize each other and she's right in the seat in front of me. And she's like, what are you up to? She's coming into Jaipur for a shoot. She's like, you too? I was like, no, I'm moderating a book launch. By the way, I'm very honored. This is,
Thank you.
This is a great honor for me. She's like, oh, really? And so I just picked up the book. I was like, yeah, it's this book. She snatched it from my hand and she's like, I love poetry. And she started reading it. And I said, listen, I might need it back because at that point in time, I was also preparing my notes. So I said, go ahead and read it, but I might ask for it back. Every 10 minutes or so, she turns around, holding up a page, showing me like lines. She's like, oh, this is so good. Oh, this is so good. And this happened like through the flight. And in the flight, she finished the book.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And she's also asked me to procure 2 copies for her. So yeah, I think you have a bestseller coming up.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah.
I've of course heard of Berlin.
Yeah.
That's a great.
Indeed. Well, of course, I want to talk about Jagdeep Singh, Jag, the poet. But I just can't get over something, and I just want to get it out of the way. The thing is, when I think of a PR man or the head of a PR agency, it summons a certain archetype in the mind, and the idea of a poet, especially a poet who has an anthology called My Epitaph, something rather somber. The archetype is again completely different. So what I find kind of amazing and very inspiring is that, as human beings, we aspire all our lives to try to figure out who we are. And we're focused on finding out what that one thing is. Meanwhile, here is a man who seems to very harmoniously possess both archetypes and doesn't seem to be in any state of conflict or turmoil with that. And I just wanted to bring that up because personally I find that really inspiring, and if you could shed a little light on it, maybe it could also just help us harmonize the disparate selves within all of us.
So the moment this book came out, It was entitled My Epitaph, and some of the senior professors of literature I presented my copy to. They were surprised, and I remember Professor Jagdeep Singh telling me, Jags, why so much of negativity? Why should your poem, your book be entitled My Epitaph? It's so negative, she said. She was quite upset actually. So I told her, ma'am, this My Epitaph is not a death poem. Not that there are no death poems in my anthology. I told her that it's not a death poem. My epitaph is, one imagines at the end of the, as the sunset comes, that you actually have not achieved anything. So what is there to write? Except that, what did I do? Except that I just wrote my own epitaph. And the thing is the cold hard stone. If this poem is the first poem, it's a very small poem. On a cold hard stone have I engraved my own epitaph. Here lies the bum who thought he'd do something in life. All he did was to write his own epitaph on a cold hard stone. So now this cold hard stone is symbolizing the difficulties in deliberate, what we call the refrain, the repetition of the line. It is to emphasize the thing. But Suhaas, if your question is that being a PR person, socializing, one person told me that you're always laughing, smiling, moving around, attending parties, happy-go-lucky. How come you've written such dark poetry? So if you by harmonious, you're meaning this, that yes, perhaps I can combine both the aspects very well. And there are some poems which are, my epitaph is not exactly a dark poem, but there are some dark poems.
And speaking of that, actually, I mean, apart from the fact that there are some dark poems, there's also a lot of humor in the poetry, and overall, it seems to be a very diverse collection of poems. I just wanted to, get your views about how you've been able to mix objective poetry and subjective poetry. I think it was in one of your interviews that you talked about the distinctions between objective, subjective, and confessional poetry.
This is, I think, a very good question, because poets either write objective poetry, which is not personal. T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, they all wrote poetry which was impersonal. For Eliot, having any personal feeling, maybe a heartbreak, would be a blasphemy for him. He would never write a poem, something relating to his personal suffering. So that is objective poetry. What I have done in this volume, which has surprised a lot of literary critics and poetry critics, is that it has both objective poems as well as subjective poems. Subjective poems are your personal feelings. Wordsworth, the romantic poets, were subjective poets. Wordsworth was they could get moved by things like daffodils, ode to a nightingale, ode to a Grecian urn, things of that kind. But even these subjective poets were not actually writing about their personal inner demons. They were not writing about their personal suffering. They were not writing about what was going within them. And as a reaction to Eliot and Ezra Pound, they were the classicist poets. They were not happy with anything personal. That's keep it hidden in your cupboard, whatever suffering or whatever pain you're having. And then came the confessional poets. So as confessional poets are also a part of subjective poetry, but a poet like Wordsworth or say Keats or Shelley would never write about their personal feelings. And then came a new breed of poets, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, Robert Lowell and others, who said they were going to write about their personal feelings, heartbreak, pain, relationship problems, domesticity problems, and even their mental illnesses. Ladies and gentlemen, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton, They were both suffering from mental illnesses. Sylvia Plath had bipolar disorder, and Anne Sexton was suffering from huge depression. And when Sylvia Plath committed suicide at the age of 30, Anne Sexton wrote a poem on Sylvia's death, which I've also written on Sylvia's death. And Anne Sexton wrote a poem for Sylvia in which she writes, "But we had decided not to kill ourselves, so why have you done it?" She's writing in a poem like this. And so they were having poems of suicide, death, mental illnesses. And I'm sorry to inform you, ladies and gentlemen, that after a year or so, even Anne Sexton committed suicide. But their poems, these were confessional poems. They were writing about anything. No subject was taboo. And Anne Sexton even wrote a poem entitled Menstruation at the age of 40. So there was no subject which was taboo for them. So confessional poetry would be part of subjective poetry, but it's not purely objective. On the other hand, objective is you see something and you get moved. I have a poem in my anthology called The Holocaust Survivor. When I read Auschwitz, a book on Auschwitz, the concentration camp, I was so moved that I wrote The Holocaust Survivor. The writer's workshop was so impressed by this poem that for each author they pick up one poem and put it on their website. They used Holocaust Survivor as one of their poems and also use it as a teaser to promote my book. So, thank you very much. So confessional poetry is a part of subjective. Objective, people like Thomas Stearns Eliot, Ezra Pound, William Butler Yeats, Auden, they were very objective.
Okay, well, dwelling a little bit more on the idea of confessional poetry, there's something that I noticed in your work. There is a bit of a recurring motif of the abyss. You have a poem called The Abyss, and you refer to the abyss in a couple of other poems as well. You use it more as a term in a different context, but the abyss shows up in your work. I brought up this quote, which is a rather famous quote by Nietzsche about the abyss, where he says, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you." My question is, confessional poetry, there is, of course, an element of catharsis. You put your innermost feelings out to exercise them, to have a sense of catharsis. But I'm also, being in Mumbai and surrounded by a lot of industry people who are struggling with themselves, their own demons, and trying to find themselves. I sometimes feel that there's a very fine line between catharsis itself and a perpetuation of these kinds of the focus on the more negative aspects of life. Is there a fine line between the two? Is that something you find yourself? Is it something that you can address?
I would like to answer this, that all my personal poems, it's not only poetry, it's any work of art, a painting, a sculpture, writing a play. Watching a play can bring about a catharsis not only among the actors, but also among the audience. So if you're seeing a Shakespeare play or you're seeing a Greek play, the audience undergoes. The problems Hamlet is undergoing on the stage are also felt by the audience. So I'm not sure about what exactly you mean by perpetuation, but the catharsis, the cathartic feeling was hugely there. Mark Twain famously said that by the time I was 21, I had fallen in and out of love at least 100 times. So the first infatuation with a girl I had was in college, but then I found that she was a good friend of mine, she was having an affair with already someone tall, handsome, rich, And I felt that I had no chance, But I was also scared that he would probably just use her and abandon her. So my first poem, ladies and gentlemen, in this book, written at the age of 22, in a college when I was doing my master's in English, is for a girl who was my classmate. And it got, incidentally, half of these poems in this anthology have been published. They are not that I've just compiled and given to. Half of them have been published in the Illustrated Weekly, the Sun, Youth Times, Junior Statesman, Imprint. Now all these magazines now are defunct, and I can assure you it's not because they published my poems. Only Femina is around. Femina published a lot of my poems. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have poetry columns in all these magazines, not even in Femina. So there's a huge problem for the new young poets who are writing. Except for some poetry portals, there's no place. So since you're talking about catharsis, this is a funny incident. And so when this book was published, someone created a WhatsApp group of our masters in English. After 40 years, I was surprised to be suddenly becoming a member. So they were everyone there. So I put them about my book. So this particular girl who used to like, ultimately she never married that guy and she moved on, I moved on. So I sent her my anthology and I told her that this poem I had written for you. I forget, I forgive. You are just another insect being led by his crafty charm into his intricate web of affluence, of deceit, of lust. Don't tell me I didn't warn you. With the soul and womb and with the badge of infamy, when repulsed, ask not for cyanide, my love, just ask for my shoulder to weep on, my love. So this poem, when I sent this book to her and I told her that this poem was actually for you, and she was talking to me on the phone, she said, what? So she told me, she was like sounding very distraught. And she says, why didn't you tell me then? So I told her, well, you were going so steady with someone else, there was no point. And the silence was, she was so distraught. And I told her, never mind, another time, another place. So poems like this bring about, at that time when I was suffering at the age of 22, when I wrote this poem, that time I went through a feeling of catharsis. When I wrote that poem, when it got published, I felt better.
Yeah, I think this, sorry, maybe I've guided the conversation to a bit of a slightly more somber, darker place. But I do have one last thing before we get out of this. The thing is, I see, again, I see a lot of people actively pursuing misery because they believe that misery is a muse for their art. If there are any aspiring artists out here who perhaps feel the same way, then I wonder what your take on that is. Because misery just happens, right? It's kind of inevitable, but you find people sort of looking for it actively.
So there was a time when, to be, especially for a lot of philosophers and writers, to, feel that Shakespeare, for instance, famously said that happiness is but an episode in the general drama of pain. So, you have this thing about philosophers, writers, generally, they have this, that the celebration of suffering. Even T.S. Eliot has written about how human beings suffer. And when they suffer, they can bring about their work better. So there are artists who are actually, they feel that if they are more somber, they're more serious. As you say, I don't know if they're really pursuing misery, but maybe they can, it's just like a writer can be ambiguous. He deliberately tries to be ambiguous so that his poetry is not understood. And similarly, there are writers who have followed in writing mostly somber stuff, not very light stuff. I agree with you there. But in my work, I can assure you that I have deliberately not pursued misery or sorrow, though most of my poems are dark. One of my most popular poems, published in the Illustrated Weekly, selected by the poetry editor Nissim Asekil, was How to Withstand Pain. So, while I was being interviewed recently by Simply Jaipur, who's here, Anshu Harsh is there, Sumendra Harsh is there, they were asking me in the interview that how is it that not a single poem of yours has joyful glee, happiness? But I told them at least there is a poem which tells you how to withstand pain. So they felt better after that.
But so I think a lousy love poet definitely has the ability to evoke a lot of humor in his work, like you have.
Yeah, so it was Pritesh Nandi who famously said, there used to be Youth Times magazine brought out by Times of India, and so they published a special issue on love poetry. I don't think Dharmender is here. She used to contribute very frequently to Youth Times, so did I at that time. And Pritesh Nandi was the editor of this love poetry special issue, in which he famously begins is that love poetry begins with heartbreak. The true love poetry comes out for longing, for nostalgia, heartbreak. He also said that you don't write a poem on the beautiful eyes or the lovely tresses of your beloved, but you would immediately start writing a poem when you suffer from a heartbreak. So I've written a poem which is more out of sarcasm, where a lady love might tell me, you write poetry, so why don't you write a poem on me? So there is a poem in my book called On Writing a Love Poem, where I'm imagining that what would she like if I wrote that you are a carnival of colors and I'll fly from one ruined boat and go to the other end, all those kind of things, And I end by saying, sorry, I can't go on. Accept me for, if you have to, for being a lousy love poet. That's all my poem is.
All right. A question about form, and the form being free verse. Can you expound a little bit about free verse? I mean, is it an absence of rules? Is there a certain kind of rules that you have to follow within it?
See, after the modern poets, in the Romantic era, in other Victorian age, Elizabethan age, there were so many rules to be followed in English poetry. There were pentameter, iambic pentameters, meters. So the modern poets broke free. They said, we cannot follow these rules to explain our emotions, inner or otherwise. And they broke free and they were writing in free verse where the poetry doesn't have to rhyme. But let me tell you, that doesn't mean you can just write anything. The best way, if you are a poet, you're writing a poem, there has to be a basic rhythm to your poem, even if it's free verse, even if it's not rhyming. There are certain rules, and there are a lot of literary devices that you can use for writing contemporary poetry or postmodern poetry. And that is, you have the alliteration, you have the strong symbols, strong images, refrains, repetition of lines, words. All these are the devices modern poets use. And the symbols are very strong. The most famous poem that I love reading out loud anytime is Eliot's The Waistline. Khushwant Singh also used to say when he wakes up at night sometimes, he just opens The Waistline by Eliot and reads out. If you, ladies and gentlemen, just try it out today, get the copy of Waistline out, read it out loud, you'll feel good. Even when you're not understanding the poem. because the poem is one of the most difficult to understand. But for me, for instance, when I write poetry, I might write my first draft first, but then I have to revise it many times, and till I feel that not a single word or not even a single punctuation mark is superfluous, I keep it, and that's how you get the thing. So free verse has really given us freedom for the young poets to get out of the earlier mold of life.
Since we're on the subject of free verse and we've touched upon contemporary poetry, I'm just curious, can you tell me a little bit about what beat poems are? And is that something that...
So beat poems were also a part of a reaction to the old poets. But now, there are a lot of... if you go to poetry portals, there are very small couplets, verses being written, which have... I've also attempted one in my anthology, which has received huge traction on the poetry portal. So beat poets were also a reaction to this, but a lot of the young poets who are writing also call themselves beat poets. They are not the original beat poets. The original were also a reaction of classicist poets who were so thing, but the young small couplets being written, they call themselves, there will be a lot of portals, beat poetry, beat poems. So these are the small couplets that people write. I also attempted one in a rare, most magnanimous mood. I had offered, take anything you want. You took my sanity. So these are the kind of poems, the small poems which a lot of beat poetry is about.
So I want to move on to, I think, what may be my favorite poem of yours, which is Hamlet. I think it's very lovely, and also its premises is quite funny, because as we all know, Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, the Shakespeare character. So Hamlet's roving spirit came down to earth the other day, right? That's how it begins. And what he sees is a billboard, an advertising billboard that says, "Just do it." And Hamlet, the man whose life is marked by the dilemma to be or not to be, it's like, how can you say just do it? You know how hard it is to just do it. And that premise I find absolutely, really, really funny. But before getting into the intricacies of the poem itself, I want to ask you, Hamlet, Shakespeare, drama, theatre, your response to a piece of drama, theatre, is poetry. How can you just shed a little light on why poetry is the medium for you to express yourself in, rather than drama or a novel or even non-fiction?
Let me tell you that I'm already working on a novella which should be ready in a couple of months. So it's not that I'm not attempting other genres of writing, but what helps me as a poet is the poetic license. I can play around with words. I can compound 5 words and make 1 word. I can imagine myself, the poetic license, as they call it. Poetry gives me poetic license to imagine myself as anything. So in the poem Hamlet, I'm imagining myself as the spirit of Hamlet who comes over the city of Denmark. He was the Prince of Denmark, and who comes and looks at the city and he says everything is fine, everything is all right. And then he sees a, Nike slogan, "Just do it," and he gets shocked. Because his problem in life was not being able to decide to be or not to be. So all his problems were, so I've juxtaposed, I've been a motivational lecturer, and when I used to lecture earlier, I used to say that Nike's slogan is the worst thing that can happen to management. Just do it. You have to first assess the situation, discuss the pros and cons, then decide and act. And here is Nike saying, one of the biggest sports companies, saying just do it. So let me tell you this poem now. Someone just informed me that they have sent a poem to the Nike chairman. You know, it's a comparison. I don't know what their reaction will be. But, you know, my poem ends. Hamlet is my favorite character. My poem ends with sympathy towards Hamlet. He says, why I couldn't act? Nike's slogan is not just about marketing sports goods. Hamlet's life was not that. He was dealing with murder. He was dealing with infidelity of his mother, murder, incest, killing his friends. All those things were involved, so there were big decisions. Though he said maybe another time I will just do it. So that is the thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the best, my favorite sections in the poem, and I'm going to, take the liberty of reading it out because it says, decisions can be gut-wrenching, like killing for incest, like killing for murder, like getting friends killed, like poo-pooing the love of your loved one. So basically, everyday problems that you and I face, right? But, and it ends on a very compassionate note. And for me, the ending and the way you've approached this poem and the character of Hamlet reveals to me, a huge humanity, a huge sense of humanity in you, and compassion for such a troubled person. And, I would just love to know, what your take on humanity is. What do you think about people?
You also said that it's a defiance of God. So I find human beings, they're making a huge effort. There's a poem of mine in this, figuring out. None of us, all the philosophers say, what's the purpose of life? What is this? So when I was doing my motivational lectures, some people would say, so what is the purpose of life? I said, let the philosophers decide what is the purpose. Meanwhile, we can try to be good human beings and outstanding professionals in whatever we do. That would be my motivational lecture. But in poetry, I find that I've written in figuring out that even he can't figure out what it's all about. But he is in capital letters, mean even God can't figure out what's it all about. I remember Khushwant Singh famously saying one day, he was an agnostic. Khushwant was an agnostic. I remember he famously wrote that if I ever came face to face with God, I would tell him, boss, what a bloody mess you made.
Okay, so here's another thing that I find really interesting also, especially because they're juxtaposed right next to each other. There's a poem of yours called The Cacophony of Silence, in which you refer to the overpowering potency of things left unsaid, which seems to make a case for, aspiring towards greater articulation. Right on the opposing page, you have a poem, Rust of Routine, which ends with, which doesn't end with, but it says, one needs to know early that the voices can grate, so stick to silence. So, in consecutive poems, you're making a case for articulation as well as making a case for silence. So, I mean, it seems like a contradiction, but I know it isn't, but I would love to know your, just get you to elucidate a little bit on that.
So, just before I answer this, we will have a couple of, just one more question from Mr. Suhaas, and then we will open for 10 minutes to the audience, and then anyone who wants to get a copy signed can do it later, so that we are following the GLF routine of having a 1-hour session. So, Suhaas, this is a very good question, I must say. The cacophony of silence. The silence can be also it can have an articulation. So this is a relationship poem where we feel that, if things are not getting on, it's best to keep silent. It's not best to perpetuate problems and just keep silent. But even silence can be very cacophonic. And it can be, it's best to, what I would say, best to discuss things and settle it, then just leave it, let it go silent. That was the idea. In the rest of routine, I have written that voices can grate, yeah, but then silence can also grate. Silence can also be grating. So, in a way, both these poems, yeah, there is a little contradiction, but the thing is that both, in a relationship poem, you know, it's written that either you should remain silent or not, or whether you should take it up. These are the issues that I've raised, and I've left it at that.
Since we're going to have just one more question.
Maybe one or two.
Okay.
Questions, and then we open.
All right. Well, two things, just to sum up a little bit of what I had in mind to ask you, was that in some of the, I was curious, I would love to know more, but we can do that another time. But you have this, seem to have this lovely relationship with God. It's not quite, you know, a very supplicant position, perhaps. And I quite love it. But I also, just to like save on the time, I wanted to, that was something I wanted to talk about. And the other thing I just wanted to get around to was, again, I don't want to delve too much into like what's already been a bit of a heavy discussion about your work. But the truth of the matter is that your anthology is really framed in terms of meditations on mortality and death itself. It's called My Epitaph. The second half of your love poems, that nostalgia and the darkness of love is again framed in a context of mortality. And finally you end with the Chandpol crematorium. So there is definitely, like, you know, death is certainly something that you've addressed.
Yeah. So, my first part of the question was about God. You're talking about.
Yeah, I mean I'm just personally curious.
So about the God, let me tell you, there is a poem in my which says that, ladies and gentlemen, there is this strong biblical symbol of the cross. It's not Jesus. It's not only the Jesus Christ who had to bear his cross. Each one of us will have to bear our own crosses, and maybe some of us will also get crucified. But so I have used this, that I've also used in a line that how he is sorting us around like flies. I've taken that allusion from King Lear, where Shakespeare writes that how God uses human beings like flies, the way he sorts them around. And that line was later picked up by Thomas Hardy in his novel Tess. So that is the line I've taken, that I am ready to bear my cross, I am ready to be crucified, but not whenever you tell me. It's enough that the way you're treating us, there is a God. You know, the Christians believe that there is a divine plan for each one of us. And the God is watching, and okay, this guy pop off, this guy go there, this guy go there. So I'm not accepting that. We will do in our own terms. Another way of putting it, that what will happen to us, the circumstances, the situation, any situation, circumstances, anything might befall us, we can't help us from that. But how we will react to it, that is within us. Someone reacts it differently, another reacts differently. How can you be more stoic, bear it solidly is the thing. And the second part, there are some of death poems in my poem, and let me tell you that I've written a poem on Chandpol crematorium. You know, my wife got very upset, a lot of others got upset when they saw this poem in the thing. But there is humor in that poem. There is that, you know, I've also written that it's nearest to my place. So I buried my dad and mom to ashes there, and I've taken a cue from Pushwant Singh, who says that when he had nothing better to do, he would take some rum and water and go to Nigam Bodh Ghat and watch bodies burn. You know, so it was pretty macabre. So I also say that Chandpol crematorium is just next to my place. So I am assuming that it's easy for my family to take me there. So I have an affinity for it. But I put a rider to my family that wherever I die, please ensure that I'm burnt only at the Chandpol. So there are some death poems. It has upset a lot of people, but now they're accepting it also. Yesterday I put a teaser that just when I felt the internal sunset was beckoning, I realized, like Robert Frost, that I still have some things to do, walk in. So that is the concept really.
I want to quickly mention that the way you in one poem say that you're going to choose the time of your own, like when you'll be crucified. I also love the fact that in the subterfuge of time, when you say that you'll sneak away from it. I just wanted to just share that with everyone. It's one of my favorite lines.
So the problem of time has been such in our lives, time and space. So it's just a way of saying that if I could beat time, I could just sneak away from it one day. Maybe that will be the ultimate moment of truth, It should happen. Before I open the house just for about 10 minutes, 2-3 questions, I would just like to say one thing. A lot of people have misunderstood I've written a poem. I've written a lot of poems on the struggle to write poetry. And there is one poem on writing a poem, with apology to Thomas Stearns Eliot. So a lot of people have asked me that you are making fun of Eliot. No one can make fun of Eliot. I remember in my masters in English, whenever a professor begins a new author, before going to his pieces of work, they tell about their life story, their life biodata. And when my professor was teaching us The Wasteland, he said at the age of 60 plus, he married his secretary, he was 20 something, and the girls sitting in the front row, some of them giggled, And he said, "Are you laughing at Thomas Stearns Eliot?" And they said, "No, you better not. No one laughs at Eliot." So I had to tell the same person, no one laughs at Eliot. But this poem of mine on writing a poem the other day someone came and said, "Sir, मेरे को भी कविता लिखनी है." मैंने कहा आप लिखो ना. बोला सर किस पे लिखोगे? तो मैंने कहा ये तो आपको ही ढूंढना पड़ेगा. But my point is that does the poem always have to mean? That poem of mine, it is saying on writing a poem, that I'm imagining that I'm writing a poem like The Wasteland. I'm invoking the muse. I'm talking about lines from Eliot, from his J. Prufrock love song, Women Come and Go, talking of Michelangelo, and there's something rotten in the Ganges. I bring it up right till there, and in the end, he said, "But what is the theme of my poem?" And I said, "Actually, I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. A poem doesn't necessarily have to mean, it just has to be." It is like this theory that art for the sake of art. Art doesn't have to always instruct, be didactic, or moralize. It can just be. A poem, like similarly, ladies and gentlemen, can just be, doesn't always have to be. Thank you very much, Suhaas.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to really ask to be indulged because I know we're pressed for time, but I wanted to end with the poem titled To Maharaja Savai Jai Singh II, because we're in the city of Jaipur. And from the title, it seems like, okay, it's going to be something about the monarchy, but it turns out to be a poem of love for the city of Jaipur itself. And your criticism of the Jaipurwalas is actually an act of love for the city. And I just wanted to just bring that up before we conclude this round, because we're in this lovely city.
So there's a poem, I told you we have a poetic license to do anything. So this is a poem written in the year 2000. I was standing under the statue circle, and there was a total mess happening. Even now, it's nothing better. I mean, every day we read One Rain in the Drain. It is actually a civic poem. All poets have written city poems. Carl Sandburg wrote famous Chicago poems. most famous poem about Pritish Nandis on the city of Calcutta. So I am reading To Maharaja Swai Jai Singh 2 is not actually about him. It's actually about the city of Jaipur, and I say that, I'm imagining, I can say anything as a poet. Oh, astronomer prince, it's just as well that you stand in a canopied sanctuary of chaste white Makrana, never stepping down to take a walk around your city. Because if you did, then you would find out what a mess we Jaipurwalas have made of your dream. So just stay there in your pedestal. So that's a city. It's basically a civic point, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Kalanika, can you please ask if anyone would like to ask a question, and Aditya, please hand over the mic to them.
We're hoping that very enlightening conversation between the two speakers on the stage have encouraged at least a couple of questions. So who would like to take the first one? If I'm audible, carry on. Anybody after me?
And as you went on speaking, it became more beautiful with the twittering sound of the birds. So I'll come over here. So sir, as you both have been discussing, pain and suffering is
Ma'am,
something.
would you like to take the mic? You're the one.
So I'll repeat it's just an observation that, the concept of suffering and pain. In some of your poetry, I found that you're trying to struggle with how to deal with some poignant emotions and feelings. And you begin by invoking God, that you say go and pray hard. But then towards the end you say that you deeply enter into the crucible of suffering. So somewhere I think there is this spiritual urge maybe to solve the problems, and then this is the battle which we fight to come out of our sufferings. So some kind of a message also, the human will and the urge to help God, take help of God.
I don't know.
I think this is how to withstand
Yeah.
pain.
So, firstly, thank you for having gone through my poems and asked such a nice question. As I told you, what she's asking about is one of my most popular poems, for which has got a great feedback, how to withstand pain. Now, when I talk about, if some tragedy happens in someone's house, you say, okay, time is a great healer, pray to God, pray like mad, there's bhajan, there's puja and all that. But does it really, I don't know if it really helps. So my poem ends is, the best is to jump in the crucible of suffering and suffer so much that then you come out pure like gold. That is my thing. That all these things people will say, pray, so you can pray to, I've written pray to the pantheon of gods. How many gods we have, you can pray to all of them. But it's not really going to help really. And you can try and, you'll say time is a great healer, this, that. But in the end you have to suffer and try and come out cleansed, pure like gold. Okay.
Even in my own pain, so you want to say that I'll bear that at my own terms.
So this is what we just discussed, that I would like to suffer on my own terms. I would like to carry the cross when I want to. I want to be crucified when I want to. I will not allow God to swat us like flies.
And you moderated so well. I mean, so many of our questions were asked by him. So, but it's something which requires rereading. Really wonderful.
Thank you very much. Talking about rereading, someone rang me up a few months ago and he said, Jags, I've just gone through your poems and I think they're horrible. So I said, fine. Then after a month, she rang up again. He says, I have reread them again and I think they are not bad. And after a month, she rang up again. Jags, actually they are quite good. So recently when I invited her for this, Jags, if not all, a couple of them are at least brilliant, I think. So rereading makes a difference, yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have another question?
Greetings to the esteemed guests. Hi Jags,
Hi.
I've been a great fan of your writing all along. Right now you spoke about the jump into the crucible of suffering and you come out as gold. Like we say कि दर्द का हद से गुजर जाना ही है दवा हो जाना. तो आपका कहना है, you say that you will choose your own time and the way you'll be crucified. Is it possible? Do we choose our suffering? Or do we just go with the flow?
So that poem is not about when I will choose my time of suffering and being crucified. It is a poem addressed to God. The way He's floating us around like flies, that now you suffer, now you die, now you get crucified. That is not acceptable to us. No one can really, I agree with you, can choose the time of whatever will be us.
And death is final, right? We all know that. Death is final.
Yeah.
But the acceptance that yes, everybody has to die one day. Does it come to everyone? And like everybody can accept that.
Yeah, so a lot of my poems is that we need to get ready to die. You know, there's a thing on that when the ultimate, there's a poem of mine which when the ultimate happening takes place, I would not like to buckle, I would not like to be scared. I would like to look at it in the eye, you know. So it has a poem like that, yes. In fact, I could read out a poem on the Sylvia Plath.
Yeah.
If we have any more questions, I'll just finish by reading out a poem of Sylvia Plath. Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Hi, I'm Durva Sharma.
Oh yeah, I didn't get it. Well, I thought you were not coming.
How can I miss this, Jags? I came late.
Yeah.
I have one. Hello, Jack, Suhaas. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. And your question, Suhaas, I think lent a lot of gravitas to the whole endeavor that Jack has entered into. So brilliant questions. And my compliments to the moderator, because sometimes the session is as good as the poetry. Thanks to the moderator. Many compliments. Jack, I'm just wondering, one can't help but notice the self-deprecatory humor all along. I don't know, because I know you as a person, so is that second nature to you, or is it very, very consciously and carefully cultivated? Because the ability to laugh at your own self, there's an absolutely wicked, sardonic quality to it, and I think that's what raises mediocre poems to the level that perhaps you have reached. So your comments.
You know, you'll be surprised when I got the mail from Writers Workshop, Professor Ananda Lal. He said the similar things, that I'm amazed by the irony in your poems and the ability to laugh at yourself on some very serious issues. And that is one of the reasons what made them accept. I think all along, even, you know, I'm an avid writer on the Facebook for last 10 years. I've written a lot of long posts, and a lot of people do tell me that you have this ability of self-deprecation, you laugh at yourself, you make fun of yourself. So I don't think there was a deliberate vein of self-deprecation in my poems, but in some of them it is there. And you know, like, that's one of my, I would say, one of my natures, right?
So, we have a question from one of the assembled gentlemen.
Hi, my question is actually to Suhaas. I really wanted to know that is it that sadness and heartbreak and misery is over glorified these days amongst content creators, because that is what seems to really sell in the industry.
Yeah, I think so, actually. I don't think it's a very positive thing really, but I do see a lot of that, and I think it sort of caters to you know, this tendency to just sort of like go a bit low with life, and it gravitates, I mean, a lot of young people gravitate towards it, and personally I am a bit you know, disturbed by it, to be honest.
So if there are no more questions, I will just finish by reading out my favorite poem from this anthology. It's for Sylvia Plath, on her death, on her suicide, and this anthology. If you read Sylvia Plath's famous poem Mirror, so it begins, I quote lines from her poem. In me she has drowned a young girl, and in me an old woman rises toward her day after day like a terrible fish. So these are the lines I've taken from her poem Mirror. So my poem on her death. You learnt early, life only dissolves and dissolves like a series of promises, and what remains are a few odd syllables. You learnt early, it's a little cornucopia of shattered splendor in a broken cut glass bowl. In fact, you laughed at it like a woman gone mad. You learnt early that the spirit in us is the spirit of blackness, that the silence in us is the silence of astounded souls. Sylvia, but you said you had friends and cool odors of flowers and trees, the twinkling light of the stars. And remember you said you could converse so well, so easily with the skies. I can't believe you could have advised, touch life and it won't shrink like an oil. Ladies and gentlemen, look at these lines. She's saying herself in one of her poems, touch life and it won't shrink like an eyeball. And how I end is, so why did you shrink? Why did you lose the fight against the terrible fish? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Shall we like to give away the money?
Thank you both for that lively and enlightening conversation. And thank you especially for us for bringing up Hamlet. It's my favorite from the book as well. For all of you assembled here, if you were as enthralled as I was with the short snippets that Mr. Singh has shared from his poems, my epitaph is available at the desk behind you. Please do remember to pick up a copy before you leave. The book is available for sale and it's for your own reading as well as a great gift for the festive season. I now invite Ms. Tusharika Singh on stage as well as Mr. Kumar. If we could have you on stage briefly, sir.
It's a very small token on our behalf to the clerk. May I invite Kalanika, who is not only the social media, may I invite Kalanika to take it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. If anyone wants me to sign a copy, I am available.
Thank you. With that, we bid you farewell.
He sits in the car from I'm ready.
Right. Thank you.
Videos and I think a great minister of tourism. Lado, आप थोड़े ड्यूटी पे रहो।
Yeah.
Why are you looking so different?
Congratulations once again.
You still come. See, I'm really going to
I swear.
मास्टर में लगे आपका लड़ो फोटो आपने वो चाय पान के लिए सर एक मैं किताब दूंगा वो मनोज जी को
वहाँ का तो वहीं का फोटोग्राफी यहाँ पे आप यहाँ